Welcome to episode 58 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hey there.
Hey, Andrew. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode, new ones are normally out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite podcasting platform to get the latest first. Please do rate and review us, and drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to introduce our featured topic and our guest for this episode.
In this time of more and more costly cyber attacks, cyber insurance is an option organizations of many sizes are considering to further protect themselves. But cyber insurance companies, as we've discussed before on this podcast, are also looking for some protection.
And that means protecting only those taking steps to protect themselves. We're going for a record on the number of times we can say protection here. In other words, cyber insurance firms are increasingly requiring clients to have their own cybersecurity measures in place. And one of those key measures, Multifactor Authentication, or MFA. To discuss, we welcome WatchGuard Technology's Director of Authentication, Alexandre Cagnoni. Alexandre, thanks very much for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure.
So to start off with, we've heard a lot about cyber insurance over the past few years. How prevalent is it as of now?
We're hearing more and more companies looking for cyber insurance. And the reason for that is obviously everything that has been happening the last couple of years. Especially in the last 18 months, we're seeing more ransomware attacks, some very famous attacks like SolarWinds, the Colonial Pipeline, Kaseya. And then the White House came with this executive order saying that companies, agencies should protect themselves with MFA, with risk-based authentication, looking to zero trust implementation. So there's a lot coming up, and a lot of companies are suffering those attacks. Because of those attacks and the risk that they're coming up with those attacks, they started looking more and more into cyber insurance. And at the same time, the cyber insurance companies, of course, insurance companies, they have to look into risk mitigation. And risk mitigation means that they want to make sure that you have the right security policies in place. And one of those is multi-factor authentication. This is one of the reasons they started to ask for that in the recent months.
So the customers here for cyber insurance, what exactly do they look like? Is this both small businesses and enterprises, or is it sort of favor one way or the other?
So it doesn't really matter the size, to be honest with you, because if you're a small company and you suffer a ransomware attack, your company will go away probably. So it doesn't really matter. And if you're a large company, this can really hit your business. Like recently, we saw the Robinhood attack, 7 million users. So it hits really hard the big business. It hits hard the small and medium business. And I believe there's cyber insurance for all sizes of companies. So even if you're a small company, I think you should look into protecting yourself. Obviously, protecting with the right tools, the right security tools, and then looking for the right cyber insurance for you.
So had cyber insurance been maybe a little bit more under the radar a couple of years ago, and now with all of, as you mentioned, SolarWinds and all of these other ransomware attacks that have come up, it's really put it to the forefront.
Yeah, exactly. Until I think a couple of years ago, if you would think about cyber insurance, a lot of people wouldn't know even where to get that. Now, most of the big insurance companies are offering this kind of protection. And it's a big business, of course, for the insurance companies, but again, they have to take their mitigation steps. So it's again about how serious you are about your security. If you're trying to protect your company, if you're trying to protect your assets, your customer assets, they want to make sure that you're really conscious about how you're doing this protection. They're not going to offer, they're not going to give an insurance for someone that doesn't have the right tools in place. And that's all they're trying to do right now. They're trying to understand, okay, how the market is moving, what are the main requirements, what the big gurus or the big companies or governments are asking companies to do, their agencies to do, and they're trying to follow the same steps in order to provide the best insurance for the companies at the right price. In the past, if you think about a small company or even a medium company trying to get a cyber insurance, that could cost a lot. Now it's something that you can more easily find it, but still, they're going to have to understand how serious you are about the security, how valuable is your data, how valuable are your assets that you're trying to protect and insure, so they can provide the right price if they can provide. Sometimes they're just going away because you don't have the right tools in place.
So it sounds like basically all levels from insurance to government, et cetera, are telling everybody that MFA is kind of the standard now, and it should be expected on most networks. So how does an organization that does not have MFA implemented, how would they put it in place? What's that process like?
Yeah, it's true. Now, MFA became the big thing. I mean, with the pandemic situation, people working from home, the use of MFA increased for remote access, VPN, and then came all those things. Just recently, CISA and FBI and NSA just released an advisory against the county ransomware. And in this advisory, I think it was the end of September, they say that companies should protect their remote access, the RDP access to servers with multi-factor authentication, because this is the main way that they're trying to get access to that. So what companies will need to start looking into is implement MFA, at least in some specific areas, which are the areas that those insurance will look into. The first one would be, for example, your email. So local email or cloud-based email, I think is an area that you're going to have to protect. And a lot of people sometimes think, well, it doesn't look important. What could happen to me if someone gets access to your email? We have to think that our email is usually the key to get access to other applications. If you want to reset your password, you're probably going to receive an email with a link to reset the password. So if someone has access to your email, probably they're going to get access to a lot of applications for the company. This is one of the reasons that email is something that the insurance will look into. VPN and remote access, I think that's a big one. I think everyone should have it. If you don't have MFA for remote access, then you're really not serious about security. Just last year, Gartner wrote an article where they said that companies that didn't implement MFA for VPN access would probably have 5 times more chance of suffering an attack than the ones that implemented MFA. So VPN is really important. And then protecting the access, the admin access to servers, to firewalls, to specific applications. Those are 3 areas that you have to look into. And the only way to do that is really to get an MFA solution that can be really fastly implemented in the company and configured in a way that can provide security and protection for all of those areas that the insurance will ask you to.
Leading into that, you're obviously with WatchGuard, and WatchGuard has some multi-factor authentication solutions out there. So tell us about the solution that WatchGuard offers.
Yeah, so we have Offpoint. Offpoint is a multi-factor authentication solution, a cloud-based multi-factor authentication solution. It's part of WatchGuard Cloud, our platform, the main platform for our unified security platform vision. So Offpoint is a solution. When we brought Offpoint to the company, we were thinking about something that could be easily implemented in the right price point for companies of all size, the right security, the right price point, and that could be implemented really fast. So for example, when the pandemic came up, people started to look really fast to how you can implement security or MFA with VPNs. So some solutions you would need to install servers, prepare your Active Directory server, install plugins, extend your directory. So the way we focus is on something that's completely cloud-based. All the management is in the cloud, and you can implement in just a couple of hours. A VPN, protection for a computer, the login to a computer, a login to a server, remote access to the server, RDP protection, the protection to cloud applications, to cloud email applications as well. So we developed a solution that's really simple and fast to implement. All you need to do is get a license. We provide a web page where you can configure your cloud applications, a unique URL for you to configure your cloud applications. You can synchronize your users. You can integrate with your Office 365 application, for example. So all of those things you can do really fast with Offpoint. This multi-factor authentication solution was designed to make the users and the admin's life simple. You don't need to be a super security guy in order to configure. But of course, we always recommend companies, especially if they don't have an IT staff, to go through an MSP in order to do the fast implementation. What we're seeing, especially in this last year and this year, is that more and more companies are looking into us. They're trying our product. They're looking into us because it enables them to really fast implement MFA in the company and be able to sign off the MFA attestation document, which is something that all the insurers will ask you to do. You're going to have to sign up to show that you're really protecting all these different areas: VPN, remote access, admin access, email access, everything you're going to have to write down. And this is going to be part of your policy. So it's something that makes it simpler for companies to implement and to be able to get their policy at a reasonable premium.
So I think employees sometimes have some minor pushback on MFA as far as seeing it as a bit of an obstacle. But when it comes to AuthPoint, what is the user seeing on their end? Is this like an app you download on your phone? Is it browser-based or is there multiple options?
Yeah, so there are multiple options. The main one that we recommend is using the mobile app. You just download the app, you activate a token in a few seconds, and you can start using. You can use a push-based authentication, which means that when you authenticate, you put in your username and password, and you're going to receive a push message on your phone that you just approved. You can even approve with your smartwatch. So it's something really easy. I think the user experience, it's good. I think it's the best combination between security and user experience. Push-based authentication gives you those advantages because the user can see when they receive the push, they can see exactly where this is coming from, which application you're trying to access, what time of the day and everything. So you can make the right decision when you receive the push. If you're really the person accessing this protected service at this moment, you approve. If it's not you, you're going to deny and block an attack. So it's really easy. We also support hardware tokens. But again, hardware tokens you have to carry around. You have to type in an OTP, which stands for a one-time password, a time-based or one-time password. But usually the mobile app is the preferred method. Of course, sometimes we hear people saying, well, this is my personal mobile phone. Maybe I wouldn't like to install. So what we really offer with this AuthPoint app is also an option for users to protect their personal accounts at no cost. So if you have a Gmail account, if you have a Facebook account, by the way, Facebook was hacked 2 or 3 times since I started dealing with dark web since 2012. We've seen databases with credentials from LinkedIn. So if you want to protect your LinkedIn account, your Gmail account, Facebook account, you can use the AuthPoint app for free to add 2FA to those personal applications as well. So even for those that think, well, this is my personal phone, I think it's a great advantage. You don't have to carry around a hardware token and you approve the authentication on your phone, and you can also use to protect your personal applications at no cost. So I think it's a great advantage, and it's seen as the best MFA solution in terms of usability and security.
So when a company does go this route and decides to implement MFA, is there anything you tell clients in terms of, how to message that to employees who, as Andrew said, there's sometimes an initial hesitation that usually people get over once they get used to it?
Yeah, it's true. I think there's a couple of things. First is about telling people and them understanding why do we need to implement that, what we're trying to protect. And the second thing is about education, how to use it the right way. Because of course, if someone calls you and asks for your one-time password, you shouldn't pass it over the phone. This is probably social engineering. So you have to be careful with that. We have to teach people to protect themselves about those things. If you receive a notification on your phone asking to approve an authentication to a system and you're not trying to access the system at this moment, you should deny this access so you block the attacker. So it's about talking to the users about the value of using MFA and also education. But not only that, usually I also tell, for example, at WatchGuard, we have, dozens of cloud applications that we use. We use Salesforce and different applications. So with AuthPoint, you can create a web single sign-on page. So you're going to have your own URL, a page where you authenticate once with your network password plus your phone. And once you have access to that, you're going to have single sign-on access to all of those cloud applications that are integrated. So let's say that you have 15 applications that you access every day, maybe Salesforce, GoToMeeting, Zoom, all different applications. You would need a password for each one. How are you going to do that? How are you going to manage all those passwords? You're going to need to have either a password manager, or you're going to do like most of the users. You're going to have the same password and use it all around for all applications. AuthPoint, when you implement a solution like AuthPoint, you're creating this web single sign-on portal. So instead of having to create, manage, sometimes reset 15 passwords, now you have a single password, your network password, and you have single sign-on access to 15 applications. So 15 less applications that I have to create and manage a password. I think as a user, for me, it's a great advantage. Every day when I turn on my computer, I log in, I go to this web single sign-on portal. I log in once with MFA, and then all of the other applications, I don't have to log in. It's single sign-on to them. I think it's a great advantage, but again, you have to use MFA. It wouldn't make sense to log in with just the password and then get access to all of those applications. That would be like the key to the castle. So I don't recommend that.
So we've seen that you write quite a few articles about authentication as well. So where would you direct our listeners to go if they want to check out some more in-depth work you've written about this?
So I like to write about some trends. We hear a lot of people now talking about passwordless authentication. I think it's a great trend, but you have to understand what are the issues with the current technologies. You cannot log into everything using the same method. Not everything supports. So there's some trends, some things that are happening. Most recent one was about cyber insurance. So I launched, I think it was a quick webinar about cyber insurance, how to protect your environment with MFA and enable yourself to get the cyber insurance. So those are the things that I like to write about. Sometimes I write about specific attacks, which is something I like also to understand, especially when it's related to authentication. For example, the Colonial Pipeline, in the beginning, they didn't know very well how it happened. And after some time, they said, well, it looks like it started with a stolen password or a stolen credential that was found in the dark web. It was still in use in the Colonial Pipeline and not protected with MFA. So they used this credential that was available in the dark web. They created a VPN to the Colonial Pipeline and got access and started the attack. So it's interesting, those cases. I like to write about them and those cases and how you can prevent, at least in the past. I'm in this market for almost 25 years. And in the past, we used to talk about MFA as maybe something extra, something that's not a big requirement. And they would talk about, well, MFA, why do we need, or how do we calculate return of investment? They would use something like password reset costs. How much does it cost for users when they call the help desk to reset the password? So it's better to have a more flexible password and MFA. Now there's nothing to do with resetting passwords or the cost of that. It's cost involving liability, involving the fact that your name is going to be out there if you suffer a ransomware attack. There's so many things involved now when there's an attack, and usually it starts with a stolen credential. So I think there's a lot of material, a lot of content there to read about that. But I think those last 18 months, at least, we've seen a lot about MFA. I strongly recommend to look at some of my articles, look at the cyber insurance. I think this is just the way the market is going. I think MFA is something that people will be used to that. It's going to be part of our lives. I remember in the late 90s, I used to work in a partner with firewalls. And I remember that at that time, we still had to justify, why do we need a firewall? You have an internet connection. Someone can get inside your network. Why do you need a firewall? It was something like people would feel like, oh, it's a luxury thing. With MFA, it was the same thing. It started like, oh, you only have hardware tokens. Hardware tokens are really expensive. It's just for a small number of people in the company, maybe for the ones that do remote access. Now it's not like that. That's for everyone. Everyone in the company should protect. It's about their assets. It's about their emails. It's about their cloud applications. It's about their server, access to their servers. So there's so many things, and it's a passion that I have, and I'm always looking into new technologies, things that are coming up, biometric solution. But still, I think the push-based authentication with Offpoint, for example, providing information about who's trying to access what, when, it's one of the best things you can do today in terms of user experience and security. And talking a little bit the other side about our fireboxes, our UTM product line, we also launched in the beginning of this year the Fireware 12.7, and it integrates with AuthPoint, which makes it easier for companies of all sizes to integrate MFA into your VPN solution. So with the Firebox and Offpoint, you can do this integration, and you don't need a Radius authentication implemented in the company. Radius is something 25 years old. It's as old as when I started working in this market. And Radius is usually required, is a protocol required if you want to integrate an MFA solution with a firewall. In the case of Firebox and Fireware, we have this integration done directly without the use of Radius, which allows fastest and simple implementations of MFA for remote access as well.
Yeah, it really does seem like the app-based, the push notifications, the fact that everyone has a cell phone on them now has been a game changer for MFA over the last few years.
Yep. Yeah. In fact, in the beginning, maybe in the 2000s, you had different mobile phones with different technologies, with different OS. You had the Windows Mobile, you have the BlackBerry OS, you had the Symbian from Nokia. There were so many operating systems. It was really hard. And you didn't have all the flexibility to write applications like that in the past. When it reached like 2010, 2011, we started seeing like the market consolidating over iOS and Android. And this made it really easier for us developers to create applications like that, rich applications. And now everyone has their own phone, and it's usually either Android based or iOS based phones. So it makes it easier to support those. And you can take also advantage of the security of those phones as well. For example, to use it to protect your application with face recognition or with the fingerprint. So it really enables people to use those applications. And again, I think people thinking about, well, it's my personal phone, I don't want to install this. I think people should not see this as a company application or something that the company is monitoring you. In fact, the company is trying to protect your identity, is trying to protect your user. And I think it's a great way to do that. It's convenient. And again, you don't have to carry a hardware token in your pocket. I mean, we have it. If you want, we can sell it, but we prefer, okay, just download the mobile app, activate, it's easy. You can have as many tokens as you want as well. So if you have two phones, you can also have that. So I think it enables people to easily adopt multi-factor authentication.
Alexandre, thanks very much for joining us.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a look at a few top stories from the cybersecurity world and talk about what they may mean to you. Now, headline number one. Robinhood security breach compromised data of 7 million users. So Alexandre actually mentioned this briefly in our interview earlier, but Robinhood has revealed that it experienced a security breach incident on November 3rd, which exposed the data of as many as 7 million users, which make up around a third of its user base. The bad actor responsible, according to Robinhood, obtained the email addresses of 5 million people and the full names of a different group of around 2 million customers. In addition, the infiltrator managed to steal additional personal information of 310 users, including their name, date of birth, and zip code. More extensive account details were exposed for 10 of those 310. So sort of cascade there. It gets a little less bad the broader number of people affected, but would really stink if you were in
one of those 10. Yeah, something tells me those 10 in particular might have been the real targets here.
Could be.
And I also wonder if that's why they didn't want to explain exactly what more extensive account details included. So who knows there? I don't know 100% what I mean by this, but this headline seemed almost inevitable to read one day, I think.
Yeah.
It felt like, oh, yeah, expected that.
Well, I mean, it's not the first time Robinhood has had issues, and just skipping to sort of the end of the story, which talks about the past a little bit and sort of an ironic twist in a way that may have led to this breach. There was a different incident last year where just 2,000 Robinhood accounts were compromised in what Bloomberg called a hacking spree, where customer accounts were looted, and some people complained at the time that there was no one available to call. So what did Robinhood do after that?
Well, they put a phone support system in place, of course, which sounds great, except that phone support system was then targeted with social engineering by the group that then conducted this breach. So it sounds like basically somebody called in and impersonated somebody over the phone with a support rep and eventually ended up with enough information on their end to get into a system.
Yeah, they managed to get some kind of credential that allowed the hack to take place and get to these 7 million folks. So Robinhood had just implemented opened around the clock phone support just last month, actually. And they had, since that 2020 incident, gone on a big hiring spree for customer service staff, more than tripling the size of the team that was in place back in 2020. So that all seemed like a good step to take. And then, of course, what did they say? Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Well, the good news here is that supposedly no social security numbers, bank account numbers, or debit card numbers were exposed. And they were pretty quick to get this contained. Basically, the hacker asked for a ransom payment. We do not know one way or the other whether any money changed hands. And the hacker also made threats of extortion. So we got the good old double twist here. So
yeah, though the interesting piece here is that it's not a ransomware attack, according to Robinhood, just a more straightforward data theft, basically. And the extortion is happening with the data that's been stolen, but nothing has been encrypted, according to Robinhood here. They have informed law enforcement and also secured the services of Mandiant, a security firm, which I think, as we discussed before, has come up a few other times in some articles as well.
Yes, and the experts at Mandiant, this firm, are expecting that this might be not just the first and only attack, but the first in several more attacks to come for other organizations and companies. So I guess this could be your alert to keep an eye out.
Yeah, and if you have a Robinhood account, you probably want to check to see if you're one of those 10 or 310 or even 2 million or 5 million. You know, the odds are that it's very possible that you've had some sort of exposure here. And it's always scary when you're talking about financial stuff because, you don't want to mess around too much with that, even though it doesn't sound like the really hardcore bits of information like social and bank account and debit card numbers and all those seem to have been spared from this one. It's always scary if it's financial information that gets into an account that has a bunch of money in it.
Well, I don't know if Robinhood is using multi-factor auth, but could be a good time to start.
Yeah. Now, headline number 2. Hackers have breached organizations in defense and other sensitive sectors, security firm says. So, suspected foreign hackers have breached 9 organizations in the defense, energy, healthcare, technology, and education sectors. Those aren't important at all, are they? And at least one of those organizations is in the U.S., according to findings from security firm Palo Alto Networks. So, not widespread at all.
Right, and this seems like a sort of foreshadowing or maybe more so forewarning type of article. Not a whole lot of deep details have been released, but I guess this is more of a public announcement that something may be coming soon. So Palo Alto Networks has prepared a security report on this number or series of breaches. And it sounds like they have been working with both the NSA as well as CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, as we've had on the show a few times before. And they are specifically working with a division of the NSA responsible for mitigating foreign cyber threats to the U.S. defense industrial base. So pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, and so they're saying the goal in going public is both a warning that others might be targeted and to sort of out the tactics that the hackers are using to help better prepare. I think it's also a little bit of PR here, too, because it's talking about, the government working together with a private security firm to, make some headway on against some cybercrime.
Yeah, getting some morale boosts in the media lately. So it sounds like this was a case of stolen credentials. Once again, this was not ransomware, not malware, but some targeted organizations had some credentials stolen with the end goal of maintaining long-term access to those networks. So it sounds like this is a fairly organized, fairly long-term, persistent, advanced kind of threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and according to Ryan Olson with Palo Alto, he said that the 9 confirmed victims are the, quote, tip of the spear of this apparent spying campaign. He expects more victims to emerge. Fun little note is the usual, it's unclear who's responsible for the activity. So they did then say some of the attackers' tactics and tools overlap with those used by a suspected Chinese hacking group. And it's always unclear, but then it's always Russia, China, or North Korea, isn't it?
Yes. So once again, Mandiant in the news. Cyber cybersecurity firm Mandiant earlier this year talked about this Chinese-linked hacking group, maybe not one in the same group, but a group of Chinese-backed hackers that had been exploiting a different software vulnerability to breach defense, financial, and public sector organizations in the U.S. and Europe. So it sounds like this is kind of a larger campaign, so to speak.
Yeah, and Alexandre, again, in our interview earlier, also mentioned the CISA and FBI warning to the public back in September about the software flaw exploitation and urging MFA, again, which is really a direct defense against these credential-type thefts. And, of course, not everyone has done it, but maybe now hearing that even more places are being impacted might push them over the finish line there.
Right. So we talked about this sort of partnership between the private and public organizations out there and security businesses. So I guess the question is why these kinds of breaches can be such a problem, specifically on a governmental level. And it is mentioned by the vice president of Palo Alto that really any business doing any sort of business with the Pentagon could have an entire range of data in just their emails alone that would be valuable in some regard to foreign spies or groups out there.
Yeah, it may even seem like, kind of superfluous stuff that's not that serious, but any little bit of intelligence that could be discovered from even an email is valuable. And we've talked before about some operations where there hasn't been anything stolen, but companies or organizations have become aware that somebody's watching, and so you don't know what the end game is necessarily on that, but just having that window into the correspondence is something that bad actors are looking to get.
Right. And then on the side of the good guys, you would say all this being disclosed publicly is sort of their shot back that, hey, we know this is going on and we're going to be out there trying to cut you off at every turn.
Yeah, and specifically, just one last note in the article, Olson, who we mentioned from Palo Alto, encouraged organizations that use the Zoho software to update their systems and search for signs of a breach. So that's relating to this software flaw, and we'll see if this prevents future attacks. Now, headline number 3. Ransomware crackdown spreads in U.S., Europe, and Asia. Law enforcement agencies around the world have made a series of arrests in the past several days in early November that together constitute one of the largest law enforcement crackdowns on suspected ransomware hackers to date. So decided to put this one last because it's, I guess, sort of trying to end on a hopeful note.
Yeah, we need some good news now and then. So as you said, this is a pretty large, widespread crackdown, specifically on actors in the malicious software group are evil. So that name should be pretty familiar to everybody that's listened to any episodes of this show or really any cybersecurity related content. They're in the news fairly often. Most recently, I believe, was the JBS, or maybe there was another one after that.
We actually just talked about them, and while we're talking, I'll double check which hack it was. But one of the things that was interesting about Revil was that they had avoided the, breakup, the hacker court jail and dissolving like a lot of the other big ones. Mm-hmm. They've kind of stuck around and kept going through this kind of rough summer for the rough past year or so for a lot of the big ransomware cells. So this is the first time where we're seeing them affiliated with some negative consequences.
I was going to say maybe on second thought they should have done some dissolving and that might have helped, but right. Maybe not. Who knows? They say this sting, you might call it, this operation had been in the planning stages for several years leading up to this. So this wasn't just in retaliation for any one thing that you saw on the news, but this is something that multiple agencies across multiple jurisdictions have been sort of putting together and planning to do in this kind of crackdown for several years. Just have to do some recon first.
Right. Yeah. And so it is interesting to see how this one all played out. 7 arrests so far between the U.S. and the European Union. And the U.S. is actually trying to put at least one of the suspects in a U.S. prison as well. Particularly, that person is Yaroslav Vasinski, and and he is from Ukraine. He was arrested in Poland last month, that's October, and was wanted by the U.S. deploying REvil ransomware and had already been sanctioned. So we've heard about sanctions, so I guess the sanction is actually leading to something even more hardcore in his case.
Right, so that was a Ukrainian national arrested in Poland. The U.S. also on that same Monday charged and sanctioned a Russian national, Yevgeny Polyanin. I'll make that right. The attempt, sure. Yeah. So this was not an arrest, which is noted later in the article. No Russian nationals have been arrested for any of this, just sanctioned and charged. So that kind of demonstrates this point of contention that's been growing between Russia and the West, I suppose you would say, in their sort of penchant to guard and shield bad actors within the Russian state.
Yeah. And Russia was really not exactly involved in all of this particular thing. And just doing some research, I was a little mistaken actually in who I was saying avoided hacker court. And REvil actually was the one who we did a story a couple of episodes ago about being in hackers court because the affiliates of REvil had mentioned that they were being cheated out of their ransoms. So REvil was actually the one that had jumped into chat and kind of jumped over the affiliates to try and allegedly directly correspond with the victims of REvil ransomware, and were trying to get the 100% payouts instead of just getting their cut like everyone else.
So it sounds like when they call witnesses, nobody's going to be coming to their defense here.
No. It sounds like both the dark web community and the law enforcement community are maybe in agreement on this one, that they wouldn't mind seeing some REvil people get taken down.
Right, so they graduated from hacker court to real court. The U.S. also stated that they recovered $6.1 million in extorted funds from REvil. The group is thought to have received about $200 million total in its operations, so that $6 million is just a small chunk, but hey, it's a win.
Yeah, it's still something. And President Biden actually addressed this particular bust by saying, we're bringing the full strength of the federal government to disrupt malicious cyber activity. While much work remains to be done, we've taken important steps to harden our critical infrastructure against cyber attacks, hold accountable those that threaten our security, and work together with our allies and partners around the world to disrupt ransomware networks.
Right, and speaking of those allies and partners, this operation went beyond just the U.S. and the EU. There were also additional arrests by Romanian authorities of 2 other affiliates on Thursday, and then one in Kuwait and a few in South Korea that have been sort of quietly slow dripping throughout the year.
Yeah, the way that the South Korea one is worded is interesting. They've quietly been arresting people alleged to be REvil hackers. Yeah, I was trying to come up with a Squid Game reference here, but since we're talking about South Korea, they could have loaded them into a van and quietly taken them away somewhere. There's my reference. No spoilers. But interestingly, the note here from ransomware analyst Brett Callow, cybersecurity company Emsisoft, says that South Korea has had far more REvil infections than any other country, primarily because hackers, for whatever reason, have deployed the ransomware software against thousands of individual homes there. And that was an interesting note, and I don't know why they targeted individuals more there than anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a different type of message or a trigger they were attempting that wouldn't work in the rest of the world, but it sounds like all the other countries, the REvil efforts were focused more towards businesses, companies, and organizations of that nature.
That's how you get your 200 million, not by going after houses so much.
So this coordinated effort took place less than a month after the Biden administration hosted a international consortium via Zoom, of course, as the times would dictate. This Zoom call included members from Poland, Romania, South Korea, and Ukraine. So everybody sort of on this list that then took action later in the month. Notably did not invite Russia to the party.
Yeah, and Alexandre Kosoy, the senior director on the investigation and forensics unit at Bitdefender, which assisted in this investigation, said it's believed that the administrators, developers, the people that actually made the virus, the backend platforms, the payment platforms, the infrastructure, these are Russian speaking. They're hosting in Russian. Their communications are in Russian. And yet, as we said, no Russian nationals were reported to have been arrested. So a little bit of a gap here in targeting a ransomware cell that is believed to be in Russia and not targeting anyone in Russia.
Right. So what does this all mean for the world and for cybercrime itself? According to Joe Slowick, the senior manager of threat intelligence at Gigamon, probably not too much long term. This is more of a short-term disruption, maybe causing some friction in the market for lower-level folks, maybe scare off some people that aren't quite as invested, but, there are still havens for these people to work, and there's still money to be made, so ransomware is not over or anything.
No, definitely not. And it will be interesting to see, though, if with all of the issues that REvil was already suffering in the community, to then have law enforcement so clearly on its tail, maybe that does scare off even some more significant folks. And maybe it does cause them to go underground and sort of reassess and reemerge in a different way, like some of those other ransomware sales that we've talked about.
Just change their name and start over.
Yep. Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, and thanks very much to Alexandre Cagnoni for joining us. Check out the links in the description for more information about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow now, however you listen, to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available, and please do rate and review us. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs, and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to get secure, stay secure.